The sky shifted from slate to a pale pearly grey as Ember reached the mouth of the den. Her muscles burned with every step, a dull ache that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. She pushed past the hanging vines, the air inside the den cool and still. She stopped. The entire family was already there, arranged in a line that blocked the path deeper into the tunnels. They had not been sleeping. Their bodies were angled toward the entrance, heads lifted, nostrils flaring to catch the scent of her return. The silence was absolute, heavy enough to press against her chest. She took a breath, the damp earth beneath her feet, grounding her. She had been gone for hours, and the weight of what she carried back with her felt like a physical burden. She did not speak. The family did not move. They watched her, their eyes fixed on the space behind her, waiting for the confirmation they had been dreading. Mama Flora broke the stillness first. She began to pace back and forth, her claws clicking rhythmically against the stone floor. Her head swung low, then high, her movements sharp and uncoordinated. She stopped, pivoted, and started the path again. Beside her, Bree stood on her hind legs, straining to see past the shadows. Her eyes darted from Ember's face to her empty hands. She did not settle. She shifted her weight, her toes gripping the dirt, her head twitching with every sound from outside the den. Papa Finn remained rooted, but his jaw muscles worked, a constant grinding tension that mirrored the agitation of the others. Ember watched them, seeing the way their bodies coiled like springs, ready to snap. Mama Flora let out a low, vibrating huff. Bree leaned forward, her neck extended, her nostrils working to filter the scent of the night air off Ember's skin. No one dared to speak, yet the demand for an answer hung in the air, heavier than the stone ceiling above them. The pacing stopped. The clicking of claws against stone ceased, as if a command had been issued from the shadows. Bree dropped to all fours, her movements fluid and sudden, abandoning her restless stance in a single motion. She did not look at the others. She kept her gaze locked on Ember, her eyes unblinking, wide, and strangely vacant of doubt. The air in the den seemed to thin, the oxygen pulled away by the intensity of her focus. She took one step forward, then another, closing the distance until she was inches from Ember. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a physical weight. Bree opened her mouth, her lips barely parting, and the sound that emerged was not a question. It was a statement of fact, vibrating through the stone floor and into the bones of everyone present. "You found it," she said. Her voice was steady, devoid of the tremor that had plagued her moments before. She waited, her head tilted, listening. Ember felt the weight of their collective stare, a pressure that pushed against her chest, harder than the wind of the night. She tried to hold her ground, to keep her spine straight and her chin level, but the strength had drained out of her limbs like water from a cracked vessel. Her knees buckled first, a slow, involuntary giving way that forced her to catch herself with her palms. She lowered her body inch by inch, the cool, damp earth of the den floor pressing against her skin, offering a relief that felt almost painful. She let out a long, ragged breath, the sound whistling through her teeth as she finally slumped forward. Her shoulders dropped, the tension snapping like a frayed rope. She rested her weight on her elbows, her head hanging low, her vision blurring at the edges. Every muscle in her legs throbbed with the dull ache of miles traveled. She did not look up. She the grit of the soil against her palms and the steady rhythmic pulse of the earth beneath her. The exhaustion was a heavy, numbing fog. She remained there, huddled, waiting for the tremors in her hands to subside until she was ready to speak. Ember forced her head up, her neck muscles straining against the fatigue. She cleared her throat, the sound harsh and dry in the quiet den. She began to speak, her voice low, steady, and stripped of all pretense. She described the cub she had found in the dark. She spoke of the matted fur, clumped and heavy, with the dampness of the forest floor clinging to the small body like dead leaves. She recounted the way the cub had looked at her, its eyes dull and unfocused. She paused, her gaze drifting to the stone floor as she recalled the most difficult detail. She described the paw. It was not just injured, it was torn. She spoke of the jagged wound that cut deep into the soft pad, a raw, angry line that pulsed with the rhythm of the cub's shallow breathing. She traced the shape of the injury in the air with a trembling finger. The family did not move. Mama Flora stopped her pacing, her chest rising and falling in sharp, quick gasps. Papa Finn leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the spot where Ember pointed. Ember did not look away. She forced them to see the reality of the cub's suffering, ensuring every detail of the jagged, ruined paw was understood before she moved on. Ember shifted her weight, her voice softening as she moved past the pain of the wound. She reached into her memory, pulling out the image of the feather she had carried. She described the way she held it out, not as a lure, but as a bridge. She spoke of the cub's reaction, the way its head tilted, the twitch of its nose, as it caught the scent of the forest floor, clinging to the quill. She recounted the silence that followed, a fragile, suspended moment where the only sound was the wind, brushing against the den walls. She described the cub's movements, how it crept forward, inches at a time, its eyes locked onto the feather with a cautious, desperate curiosity. She spoke of the moment of contact, the way the cub's small, trembling nose brushed the soft barbs of the feather. It did not snatch it. It did not retreat. Instead, the cub leaned into the touch, its body losing its rigid defensive posture. Ember described the way the cub finally took the feather, its movements deliberate and slow, as if it were handling something made of light. The tension in the den shifted. Mama Flora's ears pricked forward, her breathing slowing to match the rhythm of the story. The act of receiving the feather was a small, quiet miracle, a bridge built across the void of fear. And as Ember spoke, she saw the family begin to understand the weight of that simple, fragile gift. Ember paused, her eyes tracing the patterns of light on the den floor as she reached for the memory of the moonlight. She spoke of how the clouds parted, casting a pale silver glow over the forest floor. In that light, the world felt stripped of its usual dangers. She described the silence that settled between them, a heavy, resonant quiet that pushed away the shadows of the woods. It was not a silence of emptiness, but one of profound recognition. She explained how they sat together, two creatures bound by survival. She told them that no words were necessary, for the air itself seemed to vibrate with the shared understanding of what it meant to be lost. She described the way the cub looked at her, its gaze reflecting the same flicker of life she felt in her own chest. It was a mirror of empathy. She spoke of how they both understood the fragility of their existence, a recognition that required no language to be felt. The family watched her, their own breathing syncing with the rhythm of her words. For a few minutes, the forest ceased to be a place of fear. Ember leaned forward, her gaze fixed on the center of the den. She told them that as the night deepened, she had reached out to steady the cub. Her palm had brushed against its side, and she felt the coarse dark fur, thick and matted with the dampness of the forest. It was a deep, absorbing black, like the charred remains of a fire, long extinguished. She described how the cub had pressed a small smooth stone into her hand. The stone had been buried deep in the earth, yet it held a lingering, stubborn heat that pulsed against her skin. She spoke of that sensation, the contrast between the cold night air and the sudden, radiating warmth of the stone. It was the only heat in the world at that moment. She told them she had looked into the cub's eyes, seeing the same dark depth, and she knew then that he needed a name to pull him back from the shadows. She named him Cole. She said the word slowly, letting it hang in the air of the den, a solid, heavy sound that felt like a promise. It was a recognition of the heat he carried within him, a spark that refused to go out despite the cold. As she spoke the name, the weight of the cub's existence became real. The name Cole settled into the den, but the expected questions did not follow. Instead, the air grew thick, pressing against the walls and the occupants alike. A heavy, resonant silence took hold, filling every corner of the space. It was a stillness that demanded attention, forcing each member of the family to confront the reality of what Ember had brought back with her. Mama Flora remained anchored in place, her gaze dropping to the dirt floor as if searching for an answer in the grain of the earth. She did not move, her stillness absolute. Papa Finn stood rigid, his jaw set tight, his chest rising and falling in slow, controlled rhythms as he fought to process the weight of the information. The silence was not merely an absence of sound, it was a physical barrier, a wall of shared realization that isolated them from the world outside. Every breath taken in the den seemed to echo, amplified by the tension of the moment. No one looked away. No one dared to break the quiet that had descended like a shroud. It was a period of collective digestion, where the implications of a lost cub, a life now tethered to their own, rippled through the group. The silence stretched, deep and suffocating. The silence in the den did not break. It deepened. Mama Flora finally shifted, though her eyes remained locked on the ground. She began to pace in a tight, confined circle. Her movements jagged and uneven. Her claws, sharp and curved, dragged through the loose dirt, carving thin, aimless lines into the floor. She traced the same path over and over, a restless orbit that betrayed the turmoil beneath her stillness. Every time her paw struck the earth, she paused, her weight shifting as if she were trying to ground herself against a sudden, invisible tremor. She did not look up. She did not acknowledge the others. Her entire world had shrunk to the few inches of soil beneath her feet, where she drew circle after circle, each one overlapping the last in a chaotic, tangled pattern. Her breathing was shallow, a soft, rhythmic rasp that matched the scraping of her claws against the stone-flecked floor. She was searching for something in the dust. The scraping of claws ceased as Mama Flora finally stilled her movements. The den felt suddenly cavernous. Papa Finn stepped forward, his frame blocking the dim light filtering from the entrance. He stood with his feet planted wide, his posture rigid as if he were bracing against an incoming storm. His jaw was set so tightly that the muscles along his cheeks pulsed with every passing second. He did not look at Ember. He stared, at the wall of the den, his gaze fixed on a jagged crack in the stone. His chest heaved, the air rushing in and out. He tried to draw a full breath, but his throat constricted, stalling the sound halfway. He was a pillar of tension, his paws curled into the earth, digging deep enough to displace the soil. Yet he remained motionless. Every muscle in his body was coiled, a physical manifestation of a protector struggling to reconcile his duty. The silence held heavy and unyielding until the sound of shifting gravel broke the tension. Ash stepped forward, his movement deliberate and slow. He did not look at Papa Finn or Mama Flora. His eyes remained locked on Ember. He moved into the center of the den, the space where the air felt thickest with their shared apprehension. He stopped his posture loose compared to the others, yet his presence commanded the room. He took a breath, the sound sharp in the quiet, and tilted his head. He looked at the family, then back to Ember, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He shifted his weight, his claws clicking against the stone floor as he turned to face the group. He was not looking for permission. He was looking for a truth they were all afraid to name. He cleared his throat, a low rasping sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards of the den. He stepped closer to the center, closing the distance between himself and the others, and finally spoke. His voice was steady, cutting through the suffocating dread. "It is not a shadow, is it?" he asked, his gaze piercing the collective doubt. It never was. He waited, his body poised. The question echoed against the damp stone walls, leaving no room for evasion. Ember stood in the center of the circle, the weight of the night still clinging to her fur. She looked at Ash, then swept her gaze across the faces of the others. Mama Flora had stopped her aimless pacing, her ears pinned flat against her head. Papa Finn remained frozen, his chest still rising and falling in rhythmic, heavy pulses. Ember took a slow, deliberate breath, drawing the cool air deep into her lungs. She felt the grit of the den floor beneath her paws, a grounding sensation that steadied her resolve. She did not rush. She let the silence stretch until it became a physical pressure in the room. Then she shook her head. The movement was sharp, decisive and final. "No," she said, her voice cutting through the thick air without a tremor. "It is not a shadow. It is just a cub who lost its way." The words landed with the weight of a stone dropped into a pool. The myth they had built dissolved in the face of her certainty. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, pressing against their ears like deep water. Mama Flora stared at the dirt, her claws tracing slow, aimless circles in the dust. Every scratch sounded like a crack in the foundation of the den. Papa Finn stood rigid, his jaw tight, his chest heaving in short, jagged bursts as he fought to steady his breathing. He did not look at Ember. He looked at the shadows, his eyes darting toward the entrance, as if expecting the darkness to reclaim the truth she had just spoken. The air grew stagnant, thick with the weight of unspoken consequences. No one moved. No one dared to break the stillness. The only sound was the rhythmic labored rasp of their collective breath. Ember watched them, her own limbs heavy with the exhaustion of the night, feeling the suffocating pressure of their hesitation. They were trapped between the comfort of their old fears and the sudden sharp demand of a new reality. The den felt smaller, the walls closing in, as the family stood frozen in the grip of their own indecision. Every second stretched, the tension coiling tighter. The stillness held them captive. Mama Flora remained anchored to the spot, her gaze locked on the ground, while Papa Finn stood like a statue carved from the very stone of the den. The air felt dense, saturated with the weight of their collective hesitation. Then, a sharp, rhythmic sound cut through the heavy quiet. It was the soft padding of paws against the packed earth. Bree moved. She did not look at the others. Her body, previously coiled in uncertainty, suddenly straightened. She pivoted on her hind legs, her tail twitching with a frantic, rhythmic energy that signaled a departure from their shared paralysis. She did not speak. She did not acknowledge the gaze of the family members who watched her with wide, confused eyes. Instead, she trotted toward the deepest, darkest corner of the den, where the shadows pooled thickest against the wall. She ducked her head, her shoulders bunching, as she pushed into the narrow crevice she had kept hidden for weeks. The sound of shifting earth and rustling leaves drifted back to the center of the den. Bree emerged from the gloom, her jaw clamped tight around something. Bree stepped back into the dim light of the den. Her mouth was full, her cheeks bulging with the weight of the dark, plump blackberries. She had guarded this stash for weeks, hiding it beneath the loose stones and dry leaves in the corner. Now she moved toward Ember with a steady, unhurried pace. The rest of the family watched, their breaths held, as the small, dark fruit pressed against her teeth. She stopped directly in front of Ember. The den felt suddenly vast. The only sound, the soft thud of her paws on the earth. Bree lowered her head, her jaw relaxing, and opened her mouth. The blackberries tumbled out, landing with a soft, wet sound on the cool stone floor. They rolled, dark and glistening, coming to a rest right against Ember's toes. Bree did not look at the others. She kept her eyes fixed on Ember, her gaze clear and unwavering. She leaned in, the scent of the fruit, sharp and sweet. "For coal," she whispered. She sat back on her haunches, her tail stilling against the dust, waiting for the impact of her sacrifice. The blackberries lay motionless on the stone, a dark cluster of sacrifice in the center of the den. The silence that followed Bree's whisper was absolute, a heavy shroud that pressed against the walls. Mama Flora stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the fruit. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven bursts. She did not look at Ember, nor at the others. Her claws dug into the dirt, carving deep, aimless furrows into the floor. The air in the den grew thin, charged with the sudden violent release of long-held restraint. Mama Flora's jaw trembled. She tried to swallow, but her throat hitched, a sharp, involuntary spasm that racked her frame. Her shoulders slumped, then jerked upward as if she were fighting a physical blow. Then the sound broke. It was a jagged, discordant noise, tearing through the quiet with raw intensity. It sat somewhere between a hollow, broken laugh and a stifled, shuddering sob. Her head dropped, her chin pressing against her chest as the sound escaped her again, more ragged than the first. The rigid posture she had maintained for hours dissolved. The jagged sound of Mama Flora's grief lingered in the corners of the den, then slowly bled away into the stillness. The air remained heavy, but the suffocating pressure of the unknown had begun to lift. Papa Finn stood at the edge of the circle, his frame rigid, his jaw locked tight. He had been a pillar of silence throughout the night, his breathing shallow and controlled as he processed the weight of Ember's words. Now, he turned, his eyes, dark and unblinking, locked onto Ember. He did not speak at first. He walked across the short distance between them, his paws pressing firmly into the packed earth with each deliberate step. The space between them felt charged, the air vibrating with the sudden shift in the room's temperature. Papa Finn raised his front limb, the movement slow and measured, and lowered it onto Ember's shoulder. "We will go together," he said. The words carried the finality of a vow. "We will find him." The vow hung in the air, stripping away the remnants of hesitation. Mama Flora lifted her head, the jagged tremors in her frame replaced by a sharp, focused stillness. She moved to Ember's side, her shoulder brushing against hers, in a silent, firm acknowledgement. Bree abandoned her restless pacing, her tail ceasing its twitching as she stepped into line behind them. The den, once a space of suffocating uncertainty, now felt like a staging ground. They stood in a tight formation, their eyes fixed on the narrow sliver of light at the tunnel's mouth. No one spoke, no one shifted. The individual fears that had fractured their composure were gone, replaced by a singular driving need. Papa Finn withdrew his paw from Ember's shoulder and turned toward the exit, his stride purposeful and rhythmic. One by one, the others followed. They moved as a single unit, their paws striking the earth in unison. They reached the threshold, the pale light of the morning spilling over them, and stepped out into the forest together.